We know that you have concerns about making the switch to an electric car. We recently surveyed 16,000 of you from across the UK, and there was one worry in particular that kept almost half of us up at night. And that's this: will the national grid be able to cope with all these new electric vehicles?
You know the kind of thing. We all switch to electric cars. Everyone gets home at roughly the same time, puts the cooker and heating on, turns on the telly and sticks their car on charge. There's a worry that the whole country's electricity supply might just get a huge spike in demand and fall over.
But at Electrifying, we like to bust myths, confront issues, and if we don't know the answer, we'll ask the experts, which is why we've come straight to the source. Welcome to the UK's National Grid.
Now, the National Grid is a business that supplies gas and electricity to homes in the UK. It's the company responsible for the 4,481 miles of overhead power lines and 1,391 miles of underground cables that power the majority of our homes. It takes the high voltage raw electricity from producers and supplies it to lots of smaller electricity system operators who manage local supply to make sure we all have electricity we need 24/7. So if anyone knows the cold, hard facts around what's going on in power supply, it's these guys. This is Graham Cooper. Now, Graham is the head of future markets for the National Grid, and he specialises in transportation. As well as being a very clever man, he's also very nice, and he's the perfect person to answer a few questions about how electric cars might affect our electricity supply.
Game begin.
Contestant number one, if you could state your name and occupation, please.
My name is Graham Cooper and I'm Head of Future Markets at National Grid.
And what is your specialist subject?
My specialist subject is transport decarbonisation and the growth in offshore wind.
So let's start off with a simple question first. Will electric cars make the National Grid melt?
Simply, no.
And why is that?
The grid has been changing for years. We had big coal-powered stations in Sheffield, in the north, and the power went out. We now have wind farms in the sea sending the power in. So the grid is always changing. And between now and electric cars, the grid will continue to change.
Why do you think people assume that electric cars will cause the National Grid to melt?
Having had an electric car for 4 years, I don't know why you'd have that opinion, but it is a sudden new demand for electricity.
How does the National Grid manage electricity supply?
So people do things in clusters. So we wake up in the morning and power demand goes up, and then it tails off when we all go to work, and then it peaks in the evening. So what actually has to happen is the National Grid control room looks for the growth in demand and asks power stations to generate more power. And then when that demand falls, they ask the power stations to generate less power. But in the world we're moving into, what we actually need is consumption to be smart. So, charging your car when there's not the demand on the grid. Pausing the charge of your car when the grid is busy, when you're making your dinner.
So how do you go about doing that? How do I charge my car when the demand for supply is low?
So, I've already been doing this for about 3 years, and I do nothing other than leave it to an app. So I have a really clever app that talks to my car and my charger, and when the grid is clean and cheap, it starts charging, and when the grid is expensive and dirty, it pauses. And because of that, I know the cleanest electricity is in the car, so I'm not just moving the emissions to a power station, but it also means that I've been driving a car for 45,000 miles and it's cost me just less than 2p a mile to run.
This is an important one. What is the best kind of cheese?
Oh, I'm going to go really local. I live in a village called Barkham, and the best cheese is Barkham Blue.
Incorrect, it's Manchego. And with that, Graham Cooper for the National Grid. Unfortunately, you did drop 1 point, so you win absolutely nothing.
Not even a cuddly toy. Nikki?
So it looks
looks as though the energy supply is actually pretty well sorted, and we'll be able to charge up our cars without burning down the grid. But my next question is, how does that power get from the grid into our cars?
Well, the next stop for those electrons is a distribution network operator, also known as DNO, who are currently hard at work future-proofing and rewiring the UK so that all power can get to where it needs to. Trust me, it's a lot more complicated than rewiring your house, but they're on it.
But what the DNOs can't do is get that power supply into your house. That's where the final piece of the puzzle happens, and it lies with the energy companies. And this is the nerve centre of one of those companies, Octopus Energy.
Now, a company like Octopus Energy is just a little bit different, as it supplies electricity to your home from renewable resources. But essentially, it acts like any other energy supplier. It takes the power and serves it up to you, but it does it in a rather clever way.
Game begin.
And time for our next contestant. If you could state your name and occupation, please.
Fiona Howarth, CEO, Octopus Electric Vehicles.
And what is your specialist subject, Fiona?
It might surprise you, electric vehicles.
So, Fiona, why does it actually matter where our energy comes from?
Well, it's really important that as we go to a net zero economy without any carbon emissions, that we're generating our energy from renewable sources like wind and solar. And when it comes to our electric cars, we don't want to be powering our cars with energy that's come from fossil fuel generated electricity. We still want to be running on sunshine or wind power in our cars too.
Now, all electricity, whether it's green or dirty, is mixed together. So how can I ensure that the electricity coming into my home is going to be renewable?
What's really important in that situation is that you get your energy supplied from a company like Octopus that sources 100% green energy. What they do is they work out how much energy you're going to need for your house and for their other customers, and they will go out and source that green energy so that that goes onto the grid, ready for your homes to consume it. And the more people that do that, the grid will become increasingly green.
So I don't need a special green pipe going into my house?
Absolutely not.
What role does technology play in Octopus?
Technology is at the core of everything we do. If you imagine, in a smart energy system, the wind might be blowing in the middle of the night when you are sleeping. At that point, we want to be storing our energy, for example, in your car, or in other ways which we can use when you're awake and you want to drive or you want to power it at home. So with clever technology, we can start to do that in really, really smart ways.
And time is up. Now, it seems like you have actually scored some points. So you win, this.
Great.
The thing is, the more efficient we are, the better it is for the grid and the environment. And after all, the national grid tends to lean more on fossil fuels at peak times. So actually, if we can smooth that out, it's going to be better for the air we breathe. And that is when things get really interesting.
Some of the things we're talking about here, we're already well on the way to sorting. Things like smart meters that allow us to see our energy consumption and be much more aware of it.
Electric cars, though, they present their own opportunities. They are effectively battery storage parked right outside your home. And, well, it doesn't do much for a lot of your time.
So you just charge your car at night when electricity demand is low and prices are cheap. It's perfect, as most of us are asleep and the car isn't going anywhere. You can use clever stuff with the ultra-smart tech to only charge your car when the cost of electricity drops below a certain point.
So there you have it, one less thing to keep you awake at night. The national grid will be able to cope when we all switch to electric cars.